Thank you for joining us here at Mages and Sages podcast. For our first podcast of 2019, we're going to be interviewing Ed Greenwood, the creator of the Forgotten Realms. I had a lot of people send in questions to the Fans of Ed Greenwood page on Facebook, and I tried to incorporate as many as I could into this first interview. About an hour and 25, 30 minutes, and we're able to answer about 6 or 7 questions. It wasn't a whole lot, as you know, Ed likes to give lots of intricate answers to the questions to make sure everybody's satisfied. We're going to be doing follow-up interviews with Ed in the future. Probably in the next month or two, we're going to do a whole series on Ed, and hopefully we'll be able to get all these questions answered to your liking. Without any further ado, I give you Ed Greenwood. Okay, welcome to Mages and Sages. Today we're going to be speaking with the creator of the Forgotten Realms, Ed Greenwood. Ed has been a powerhouse in the gaming industry since he was very young. I say very young when he sold his original Forgotten Realms to TSR way back in, what was it, Ed, 1984?
Yeah, the Realms, I sold the Realms to TSR in 1986. I started writing for Dragon in 1979.
That's it. There you go. That's it. You started writing, but you wrote truly your first story about any of the any of the creations that you've been using in your novels and your stories back when you were 8 years old, and I believe it was One Comes Unheralded to Zerta.
Yes, that was the first Realms story. I actually started writing about the Realms when I was 5, but I didn't know it was the Realms. I was just working in this fantasy world, and a year after I started, when I was 6, I had figured out it was the Sword Coast, and it was Mert the Moneylender having little short story adventures, and he was always running afoul of the local authorities, his creditors, and whichever new enemies he'd made during the story. So at the end of each story, he would leave town in a hurry, and so he went from city to city, trending south along the Sword Coast. So city by city, I was exploring the Sword Coast, and yeah, that was it.
So the realms just kind of took shape as Mert was running from authorities.
Yeah, and it was fictional. This is long before there were any role-playing games beyond something called Kriegspiel, which is a military simulation game, not a game you would buy and sell, a game that general staff people played to train their officers, where you put people in different rooms and you simulate the fog of war by sending runners with orders, and you see how much of a mess they get into.
Right.
In real life, yeah. But I mean, we are talking 10 years before any role-playing games. Dungeons and Dragons, 10 years before Dungeons and Dragons.
So this is back when Gary Gygax was still coming with chainmail.
Yes, yeah. Okay. And I didn't know about chainmail because I hadn't yet discovered that there were such things as hobby shops, and there were no such things as game shops. Hobby shops sold model railroading, dollhouse stuff and dolls, car racing, model car racing, and endless kits for making model airplanes and cool model cars and so on. And then there were simple games like tic-tac-toe and chess and backgammon, and then there were all the commercial games like Yahtzee, Monopoly, endless variations on steeplechase or dog race or whatever you want to call it, Parcheesi, and all that stuff. But there was no such thing as the wonderful fantasy worlds that we explore in games. The closest you got to a fantasy game was Candyland.
And that's pretty straightforward too. So
yeah,
that's not what we would consider a fantasy land anyway. But that's wild. I never would have known that. Now, you to get a little more history back on how you learned your writing style, because it's very unique and very very colorful. And when you're allowed to let loose, it gets very colorful, which I do appreciate. So where did you get your inspiration? I mean, I know you read a lot of books in your father's basement. So what books did he have down there that gave you the greatest inspiration to develop your own style?
Well, yeah, the books in his basement I didn't get to read because they were locked away. They were either top secret NORAD stuff or astrophysics or electronics books, and I wasn't interested. Although, I did notice some documents around the house that said top secret, and had an top secret, burned before reading, and they had these they had a big drawing of the American eagle with 2 lightning bolts clenched in one talon, and the other talon was firmly planted on the North Pole, because it was, guarding North America against
that
bombers.
was Strategic Air Command, it sounds like.
I guess, but I mean, I was too young and I didn't care. But yeah, halfway down to the basement was my dad's den, which all of us kids came to politely loathe in later years, because it's where we had to do our piano practice at the piano. He had a piano in there. He had a black and white TV. Well, there was nothing but black and white TV. Yes, I'm that old. And he had crammed all sorts of bookshelves in there that he built himself to fit the exact height of books, which meant everything in there was cheek by jowl by size. A first edition of The Lord of the Rings in hardcover was right next to The High White Forest by Ralph Ellen, a novel, The Battle of the Bulge, which I found fascinating as a kid, because the German side is trying to put double agents behind the Allied lines in the Bulge, and they are grabbing German people who have spent time in America and trying to train them to can completely pass for American accents, so they can give wrong commands in the dark. And there's a classroom, and the SS officer is coming to inspect the class, and the teacher is trying to get them to say the F-bomb for 3 pages. And there's lots of fagok and stuff like that, because they just can't manage it. And of course, when you're like 5 years old, you find this hilariously funny.
Of course you do.
Yeah, but no, the point is, my dad had everything in that den, from the proceedings of the IEEE, the International Something of Electrical Engineers, down to what would pass in those days for lurid paperbacks. The Nude Said No. I spent years searching for The Nude Said Yes and never found it. She was staked out nude in the sun, naked in the sun to die. Owlhoot Trail. These these wartime paperbacks on paper and bindings that were beginning to go even then. And I would come pounding upstairs to my dad and say, "This was great, Dad. Where's the next one?" And if he had company, he would that's very nice, try to get rid of me, and he'd say something like, "Well, son, if you want another one of those, you're gonna have to write yourself. That writer died in 1932. "Oh, okay." And I go pounding back downstairs, and I try and write the next adventure in the style of whatever the book I just enjoyed was. So I was learning how to write by pastiching very badly writers that I liked the sound and look of. Everybody from Rudyard Kipling to Lord Dunsany, to really, really pulpy writers, bad pulpy writers, and all the great classics of literature. So I was, as Archibald MacLeish said, the poet, a writer learns from other writers like a small boy stealing apples from an orchard by making off with what he can carry and has a taste for. Oh. So I'm paraphrasing. It isn't the exact wording. I can't remember it off the top.
Still gets the meaning across.
Yeah, and that's what I was doing. I was learning without ever being taught grammar or being taught what good writing was or not. I was learning what grabbed me as a reader, and learning what different styles of English, including some quite pedantic styles. I mean, we had history for the masses, like Winston S. Churchill's History of the English-Speaking Peoples, and his series on recounting World War II, the Gathering Storm and all that stuff. And we had really, really heavy-duty, impenetrable academic thesis writing, because my father was a professor by then, and there were lots of what I would call writing that was more than dry. It was deliberately cryptic and obtuse, as in, you would never say, "It's clear from this, that." You would say, "As anyone who has a nodding acquaintance with the sources will." readily discern, and it would go on like that for pages. I learned how to write like that. People at TSR would notice that I had run-on sentences that went on for pages.
Yeah, but they were grammatically correct.
Of course they were grammatically correct. They just had many, many asides. I'd say, when I'm talking about the realms, I would be on a topic, and then, and I should tell you about. So I would go off on a tangent, and then I'd say, and that reminds me, and I'd go off on another tangent. As Peter Archer at TSR much later on said, this chapter is a bit shrubby, meaning like a shrub. It grew in all directions with little twigs and branches going off. Let's prune some of these. So anyway, I learned to all these different styles, all of them, from high to low, and therefore when I came to write something, I could try to copy the style of anybody from P.G. Wodehouse to Kipling to Dunsany to Lynn Carter, who was by then beginning to bring back into print all the classics of fantasy, from the Amadis of Gaul and all the ancient romances, the very things that Cervantes lampooned in Don Quixote.
Right.
He's parodying them. So all of that old stuff and all of the Arthurian and Robin Hood retellings, there's everything. So I could therefore unload upon an unsuspecting reader all sorts of different styles. And 400 books later, I'm still learning different styles. Like the ones I post on Twitter now have to be very, very short and succinct.
Right.
And so you learn a new thing.
Well, it's like Elminster in Hell was it looked like an experiment in a writing, because it was all done through thought, and so there was very few areas where it was like two people talking. It was like going into Elminster, pulling out a thought, and you'd get to read it, and then it's gone, and then you go to another thought. So was that like an experimentation in a new style?
Yeah. I wanted to do something different. See, all of the various Realms novels were experiments in different ways, because I was always dealing with an editor, and quite often a different editor than the last novel, and they'd say, okay, we want a book that is sort of like this, and usually it was, we want Elminster to be the main character. That wasn't my choice, that was TSR's choice. And then, by the time Wizards of the Coast took over, it was established that we all had, quote, signature characters. And in fact, my last multi-book contract with Wizards required that I write Elminster novels.
Right.
But exactly what was in each novel, we worked out between me and the editor as things went along, because books being tied to games, because it's a gaming company, there are things like that you want in a book or don't want in a book, because you don't want them to duplicate or contradict or something that a game is going to come out with. And just as in the real world of publishing outside gaming, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the TV series, was debuted but had to sort of mark time for almost a year until events in a movie that was then released meant they could turn around and tell the main story they'd always intended to tell.
Right.
And that sort of thing happened with a lot of my Realms books. And Elminster in Hell was I do not want to do a straightforward battle book, but I was handed the first scene, with from the end of a Troy Denning book, that sets up that novel. We're falling through the air through a rift. Okay, right. Where do I go from here? Number one. Number two, okay, here's what we want the book to be about, Ed. Okay, and we don't want it to do much in the way of affecting events in the realms. So can you have a big book full of battles that doesn't change anything in the realms? Oh, okay, well, I guess it's largely not going to be set in the realms then. It can either be set in someone's head, ta-da, check.
Right.
Or it can be set physically somewhere other than the realms. Oh, 9 hells, check. And there was an in office joke at TSR. Well, you could call it Elminster Goes to Hell. And whereupon I thought, oh,
no, never say that to you.
Yeah. So I started writing Elminster in Hell, and for that particular book. But yes, that was an experiment because I had a very short time to write it, very short, between real life and my real life day job and the other game projects I was doing for them. So one of the ways of getting the book actually finished faster was to grab a whole bunch of snippets from scenes I'd written up, because one of the things I used to do to bring the realms alive, and some writers do this, Roger Zelazny famously used to do it, and if you read his collection Unicorn Variations, he actually talks about that in one of them. There's a short story called Dismal Light, which he published just because he had a deadline crunch, but he did this for everything. It's a setup for a novel. What he was doing was, when he first introduced main characters, he would write a little short story for himself, not for publication. Dismal Light was one of the few that made it out there, in which he wrote a short story about an event in the life of that character that wasn't going to be in the novel, so that he understood how that character acted. So I had done a few of these, a few sort of you are there special moments for, like, when Elminster and Kelvin had argued or something like that, and I would just write it. And then I could hand it to Realms designers or other writers who were going to do fiction in the Realms and say, okay, this is how I see the characters. You don't have to follow this, but this should, like, bring the character alive for you. And other than that, they weren't intended to be published. But I had a whole bunch of them lying around. I thought, do any of them fit with this narrative, which, spoiler warning for the book, Elminster is losing memories forcibly, and he's trying to protect what's left of his sanity in himself by trying to frantically select the memories, as the entity that's taking the memories is boring ever inwards into his mind. He's trying to frantically say, oh, don't need that one? Here. It's sort of like if somebody comes to your house and says, we need 20 of your things right now. And you're frantically going, I don't need these socks. That baseball glove doesn't fit me anymore. That globe has always been there. I remember it, but I don't need it. And you're frantically trying to give them stuff you don't care about, that you can live without, so they don't take something valuable that you really need, that really matters to you. And that's what Elminster's doing throughout the book. And so therefore, I started putting some of these little memories I had saved up just because it would fill page count and I could meet my deadline, which was an impossible deadline. And that's something I'd like all fiction readers who read my stuff to know. Quite often, something I produced for the Forgotten Realms was produced in a tearing hurry because I was rescuing the publisher one more time. The last year that TSR was staggering along before Wizards of the Coast purchased it, that year I wrote 11 products for TSR.
Wow.
And that's with a 120-mile one-way commute to work for myself and my wife every day, and 120 miles home, and 6 days a week, and then for 1/4 of the year when we were working the Sunday shifts at the library, 7 days a week. So I was like, holy, just scrambling along. And by November of that year, I can remember, I could barely remember my own name. And thank goodness for computers, because I was merrily typing along a sort of racy, almost sex scene between these two characters that were sizzling along, and realized these two characters aren't in this book. Oops.
Oops.
But the beauty of computers is you just cut and paste and dump it into a separate file, and it's not lost, it's not gone.
But what I found fascinating about Elminster in Hell was that it opened up so many doors that I could think of a couple of dozen novels or short stories you could have written out of just the memories that didn't particularly pertain to any current novels that are out now, but that just sounded so intriguing.
And that's the secret of designing for the realms. That was indeed one of I used to call it the rule of three, or the law of three. And this was the directive I gave to everybody, and Jeff Grubb loved it and turned around and gave it to everybody. Steve Shend and Julia Martin both continued with this. It was like, and people like Eric Boyd and George Crashus and so on loved it and would follow it. For every loose end you tie off in the Forgotten Realms, you have to give us 3 new ones, so that the world continually seems alive. So if I threw something out that was in the old gray box, in the current clack, as a news item, and you said, "Oh, I'm gonna answer this or resolve this or tell us what happened next in my novel or in my game product," that's fine. But give me three more. Give me three more unfinished things, adventure hooks, ideas, things that are happening in the realms that either a story writer or a dungeon master having D&D adventures in the world can pick up and run with, because I don't want everything to ever be resolved. You see, the one problem with, say, the Dragonlance, the original saga, or the Lord of the Rings, which it was sort of following the model of, is you come to this great big epic conclusion where the good guys improbably win. Hope I didn't spoil that for anybody. And then what do you do next? Because you haven't left any appreciable loose ends. What do you do for an encore? And of course in Dragonlance is, oh, well, we're going to go and see the backside of the world. We've never seen the other side of Kryn, so what's there? They did a box set. David Eddings did the same thing. When David and Leigh Eddings were writing the Belgariad, you get to the end. Oh, the publisher wants more. Well, yeah, we saved the world and reordered the gods. This is it. Well, we need more, and we'll pay you this much. Oh, good. Okay, guess what? They get to save the world again. And
right. No, yeah.
And then there's a bit of an anticlimax.
That kind of comes to the first question I have. I have a lot of questions from fans of the page, of the fans of Ed Greenwood on Facebook. If you haven't liked it, please go through. We would enjoy the numerous likes. And the first question I could think of, and this kind of bugged me and from the beginning, from a couple of editions back. And I understand about the Dungeons and Dragons, but the realms particularly being a living and breathing a world that has to change with the times. Do you think that Dungeons and Dragons as a whole is moving too quickly through editions?
Well, okay. There's the difference between what a game company needs and wants to do, which is sell you stuff.
That's true.
So, and what sells best? Core rule books, or in the case of Magic the Gathering, if the main thrust of things is tournament play and cards are being made legal or no longer legal because they're quote broken,
right.
Then it makes sense to resell people new editions of the game because make more money and keep things moving along. This is legal, that is legal. And gamers, just as readers, want to know all the secrets. They want to now, even though that can kill some of the attraction of the setting. We still want to know everything. That's what as thinking, curious humans in life. We want to know more. Maybe not everything. Maybe we'll say, no, I want that still to be a mystery, but I need to know more about this over here, or I really like to know more about that over there. And of course, over time, more gets revealed, and more gets revealed, and more gets revealed. Now, from my point of view, as a gamer who plays board games and military simulation games, I very much want to know what the rules are, because quite often victory hinges on what you might call rules lawyering, knowing in detail of the rules. But the zone of control does not extend across a river hex, that sort of stuff.
Right.
After turn 32, the Russians are allowed double reinforcements, or whatever. And knowing that detail of the rule can be crucial to how the game turns. But when it comes to role-playing, I always think to myself, if you're trying to play this as a simulation, you're playing the wrong game. The role-playing is about role-playing, ham acting, telling a story together in a fantasy setting. And my personal gaming group that's been going, since way back when, 1978 continuous play onwards. They started as the Company of Crazed Venturers in 1978, and they retired those characters because they got high enough level, and we restarted playing at the library. I was working at a library and then was asked to do a Dungeons and Dragons program, because they needed something for teams that teams would attend. And guess what? A good grooming program? Nobody came.
No.
And then they had to first aid for babysitters, and they got like the requisite number of sullen kids whose parents thought this would be a really good thing to do and to have.
Well, unless it was babysitting baby goblins.
Well, yes, yeah. And, babies over 18, it's that free of charge. That's
exactly.
But there was no enthusiasm amongst the teenagers. So eventually somebody on staff figured out, Ed's weird and he plays his Dungeons & Dragons thing, and we keep getting asked about it. Why don't we let him run a Dungeons & Dragons program? Now, the initial enthusiasm on the part of the librarians quickly waned because they were interested in statistics. You show a movie, it takes 2 hours of staff time, and as many people as you can cram into the auditorium, 100 people, 200 people in the auditorium, you can say, hey, look, for 2 hours of staff time, we did 200 people. And then Dungeons & Dragons, they want 4 hours of staff time for 6 people, 8 people. What is this? But until that happened, we were running D&D. So that's when we relocated to Shadowdale, and the characters that became the Knights of Drannor. And the point of all of this is that they like to play, the personal style of that group is acting out, speaking in funny voices, and they don't care about the rules. So therefore, as Dungeon Master, neither do I. I'm not trying to look stuff up in the rule book. I'm not trying to apply rules on a fine point detail. Now, if I was playing in a tournament, yes, because then how well you do in the survival of your character can depend on following the rules precisely and understanding them and making the right rulings. But for the Home Realms campaign, we are telling a story about characters that we are gradually getting to know and love, or hate, more and more deeply. And we are storytelling together, and we want to be in the mood of the unfolding story. We do not want to pull ourselves back out of sharing the experience together by stepping out of it, consulting the rules and so on, in the same way that, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. There are people who play Dungeons & Dragons like a game, and they metagame constantly. They have a party caller, and somebody says, well, if the thief backstabs here, he'll get more damage according to the rules. So why don't you distract with this? And what's the area effect of that spell? Okay, you cast your spell over here, and at the same time, and they're thinking about it like a football quarterback in the huddle is trying to direct the team, whereas I don't want any of our heads to be thinking like that. I want them to be the character in the world, and I, as Dungeon Master, saying the wind is even more chilly now, and the moon is rising through the scudding clouds. You're rustling behind you. What do you do? 10.
See, that's perfect. But also, did you realize that in letting your gaming sessions take that course, that you were creating these such iconic characters that were going to be part of the Forgotten Realms later on?
No, I didn't. Well, I did and I didn't, because later on, when we were doing things, I would quite often be asked by TSR, could you playtest this at the gaming table, but not tell them that's what you're doing? I mean, it's not
really?
It's not like they were stupid. It's not like they didn't realize what was going on pretty quickly. But the whole point was to see what their reactions were as players. Good players, veteran players, but not putting on their game designing thinking caps,
Right.
And they wanted to see how it played out at the table. And this wasn't just me. Many, I can recall an early Gen Con in Milwaukee where they actually did a seminar. One of the Bloom brothers was giving a seminar about what they put in and left out a Queen of the Demonwood pits, because they'd say things like, well, we had this really cool room where these pillars would turn into salamanders if you touched them. But it's not in the adventure, because everybody walked in, saw nothing except pillars, and turned around and walked out. Oh, and there's nothing here. And we turned around and walked out again without touching the pillars. No. So, I mean, they were doing playtests all the time with all sorts of people, and they deliberately wanted gaming groups with different styles.
Right.
From the football quarterback to the, I've put on my costume, and although I am 300 pounds, male and bearded, I am playing the elf maiden. Hello, and they wanted all of.
Wasn't Florin played by a woman?
No. Florin was John Hunter. It is John Hunter, a professor, I won't completely blow his cover. But,
don't.
But the point about Florin is, as as John personally was handsome and head of a rugger team at that point for university, and was irresistible to the gals, we would sort of lampoon that by having Florin walk into a room as the envoy of Shadowdale, and all the female NPCs in the room would go, ah, and faint. And he'd give me this sour look and say, really, Ed? So
well, as a matter of fact, that it kind of goes into we have a question here from Aaron Painter, and he asks, whatever happened to Florin and the other Knights of Drannor, and do they still exist in some form in the current Shadowdale?
Okay, here we go. Okay, the specific fates of the knights are all NDA, as in non-disclosure agreement, as in I can't talk about them because Wizards has plans.
Oh,
good. Which may or may not ever come to anything. Some of the original knights have popped up as minis in various releases from various licensees. But I have no idea if these plans will ever come to anything. And yes, occasionally you see some of them mentioned in some of the 5th edition, in passing. But in the Home Realms campaign, we're still in 1358 DR before the Time of Troubles, because when I talked about my dungeon mastering style, well, part of it is I give the players votes on realm-shaking events that are in the published realms, and they have voted that they do not want the Time of Troubles, perhaps ever, but certainly not yet, because there's all these things they want to do first. So guess what? Hasn't happened yet. And real time in the realms passes very slowly in the Home Realms campaign, because we are gaming what they're doing. So we could spend 2 or 3 months of play sessions, which aren't very often at all these days, and only get through a couple days in the realms. But I can tell you that back in 1358 DR, in the Home Realms campaign, all of the knights are going strong.
Okay.
They're fathering kids and they're adventuring, except for those like Douse Sulwood, as an example, who've already retired. In his case, he retired to temple life. He was a priest. And the player of Douse Sulwood started a new character, Rathan, who is quite familiar to the readers of the novels, Rathan and Tor. But I can also tell you, and tell Aaron, there are still Knights of Drannor in Shadowdale as the Realms date approaches 1500 DR. Don't expect them to all be the same ones.
Right. So could we expect any offspring from the original Knights to take up the mantle and of the Knights of Drannor 2nd edition type?
Oh yes. And other new recruits. The Knights although the Knights that have featured in the novels and the short stories tend to be a rather small cast, the Knights in the Home Realms campaign have had a whole bunch of recruits who haven't lasted long for various reasons. Morngrim and Cathra, who became Lord of Shadowdale, to become the Knights, they turned around and saddled various of the NPC members with the lordship. Hey, we don't want to be lords of Shadowdale and have to sit here every day on the throne. Here, you be lord. We're going to go adventuring again. Well, and Morngrim, of course, had a past. He was of the royal family of Ruathan, and guess what? When his country needed him, he answered the call. He left the Knights and went back to Ruathan.
Right. Okay, I got one here from your old friend George Crashos, and I think he's just trying to dig you for more information. But he wants to know what lore you can give on the Dwarven kingdom of Tethyamar.
Tethyamar?
Tethyamar. Yes.
As little as possible, thanks to, yes, indeed.
You hear that, George? You're not getting anything.
Oh, no. But, okay, what George is not getting is much that's new. Here we go with the potted summary. Okay. Tethyamar was once one of the richest dwarven kingdoms, and among dwarves, it's not unique, but it's unusual amongst dwarven kingdoms because it was a melting pot where dwarves of all bloodlines were welcome. In the same way that the gold rush in North America historically brought people from all over the world, right, to get rich, and they were tolerated, if not liked, cheek by jowl. Nobody said you can't be here as a prostitute because you're not from here, or you can't be here as a prospector because you're not from here, because everybody was there for the same reason, to get rich on gold,
Right.
So, in Tethyamar was also unusual amongst Dwarven kingdoms because it was a vertical kingdom geographically rather than a horizontal one, because it was in a comparatively small area on the surface map of the realms, but it dug deeper and deeper and deeper in the same space, following the vertical veins of ore that were under the northern Desert's Mouth Mountains. Tethyamar was named and founded in the year of depths unknown. Aha! Minus 145 DR. By Rorin, blood of Thordbard, of the Iron House, a fallen Ogran, an earlier elf. Tethyamar grew and grew downwards as mining went on, and the dwarves of Tethyamar used rafts sent down the river Tesh to the Moonsea to sell fine smelted metals from Tethyamar to humans and elves. The dwarves of Tethyamar were under constant attack by orcs and hobgoblins in the Desert's Mouth Mountains, and the beast men of Thar, which is, to those of us who play D&D, ogres, out in the open country around the Moonsea. And Tethyamar even fell as a kingdom to a determined orc onslaught from the Dragonspine Mountains in minus 88 DR. But the dwarves rallied, recruited other dwarves by going around talking about Tethyammar's riches. Hey, want to strike it rich? Are you from a lowly poor house? Would you like to be rich beyond the dreams of avarice? Come to Tethyamar. Come on down. Yeah, so they rallied enough troops and defeated the orcs, retook the halls and caverns of Tethyamar in minus 86 DR, 2 years after they lost it. And from then on, Tethyamar was on a war footing. Forever after on a war footing, except that forever in this case only lasted until the year of the Dark Dawn, 1104 DR, when a dozen-year-long war ended with Tethyamar falling for good to a host of orcs, bloodthirsty barghests, and demons summoned by the circle magic of orc adepts, and an archmage claiming to be the great Lunadim, wizard leader of the ancient goblin kingdom of, yes, Lunadim. So the handful of surviving Ironhouse dwarves fled to dwarf holds underlying the far hills and under the Stormhorns in Cormyr. Of the royal line of Tethyamar, only the king's youngest son, Gellan, survived, though he fathered sons and daughters later. One of them, Borlin, mustered the Mithril Legion to try and retake Tethyamar in the year of the Wave, 1364 DR, but that attempt failed. In 1369 DR, Gellan died in exile, deep beneath the far hills, of a wasting disease that resisted all medicinal and clerical cures, and the leadership of the Iron House passed to his twin sons, Taster Ironblades, Ironblades being a nickname, and Tester, nicknamed Farsighted, so that's Ironblades one word and Farsighted, two words but rammed together into one, Farsighted, who decided to rebuild the might of the Iron House before wasting the precious blood of our people in another assault on Tethyamar. Now, they're still at it, this rebuilding, so they haven't tried to retake Tethyamar yet.
Right.
But that doesn't stop dwarves from all over the Inner Sea lands vowing to take a hand in reclaiming Tethyamar when the attempt comes, and awaiting the day when, quote, the king shall take his throne again. By 1372 DR, the Zhentarim had occupied one of the uppermost fortresses of Tethyamar because the dwarves built fortresses underground throughout Tethyamar because they were always fighting. They built little strongholds that they could defend and retreat to, and they were full of weapons and food and so on, so they could hang on for a bit against any determined assault. Of course, in the end it didn't work, but the fortresses were all still there. So the Zhentarim took one of the ones that was just under the surface. But within 3 years of 1372 DR, and 3 years of starting mining, so this is the Zents mining instead of the dwarves, the Zents found themselves fighting all manner of monsters from the deep Underdark. And this happened because the Zents spent all their time and attention on forcing their slaves to mine faster, not on deep defense patrols, as the dwarves had done. The dwarves learned that they had to. The Zhentarim didn't care, because, hey, you lose a few slaves, you lose a few slaves. But in the meantime, I want to get richer faster. It's sort of the modern capitalist belief of, I don't care if we're polluting the planet. I don't care about global warming. I want to make more money faster. Need those profit margins, So
Right.
they behaved accordingly. So a century later, the Zhentarim are still clinging precariously to a small, near-surface area of Tethyammar's mines, and they're fighting frequent prowling monsters of the realms below just to hang on to that. Like, there are monsters coming saying, there's always going to be food here. These poor slaves, there's always humans here. And at the same time, dwarves have begun to lead cautious scouting forays closer and closer. And that's it. There you go. I hope that keeps George happy. For now.
He'll be smacking his head against his desk. I guarantee it.
Yes.
George's appetite. He's never sated.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
No,
that's
there's not. Matter of fact,
realms.
that's what makes our fans, your fans, fantastic. Is that they always want more, and you just give them more and more.
And that's what it's all about. I shall die giving them more and more. Hopefully not soon, but.
Well, make sure you just do one limb at a time.
Okay.
Okay, I have another question here about Elminster, and this is from Nick Ferguson. He wanted to know was young Elminster, of course, this would have been at the time when you first wrote him. Were you about 5?
Yep.
Okay, so was young Elminster based on any pop culture characters of the time?
Yeah, Merlin.
Merlin, okay.
Merlin with a dash. It's before TV. It's not just a TV trope. It's not a Hollywood trope. It's become both of those things. But it was around in the romances. In the Mattis of Gaul, there are wizards who are pains in the butt, because the whole point of that sort of character is to be mysterious and to be a sometimes support, but usually a goad to the hero. But you don't want the wizard doing all the heroics, because people can't identify with the wizard unless you go inside his head and therefore reveal too much. So you want the wizard to be this crazy old coot who's difficult whenever, for plot reasons, you need him to be difficult.
Right.
And it's somebody else to be the hero. So no, young Elminster, the fighter rogue combination, that is because when I was writing Elminster, The Making of a Mage, which was Brian Thompson as head of TSR's book department, saying, okay, you're all going to have iconic characters. Margaret and Tracy, I want you to write I, Strahd. Ed, I want you to write something called Elminster, The Making of a Mage. So I did. And I ended it with something that was 600,000 words.
And it's one of my favorite books that you've written.
Well, to me, I just sort of wince whenever I look at it, because I overwrote so much. And by the way, Brian said to me, Elminster, within the pages of this book, has to become every single one of the core D&D character classes, the 4. He has to be a cleric, he has to be a magic user, he has to be a fighter, and he has to be a rogue. And I said, oh, and I suppose he has to have psionics too. And Brian said, of course. And I said, well, if I'm going to have to do this incredible baton race and stupid thing, I want him to be both a woman and a man as well in the book. And Brian said, oh, yes, that's so... Oh, clever. That's why. Oh, yes, perfect. So that's why I had to do all that. And of course, in the end, almost all of it had to end up on the cutting room floor, because 600,000 words. I had an entire book-length thing because I'd fallen in love with Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, Fritz Lieber's Lankmar heroes.
Yes.
Long before there was a game called D&D. And what I ended up doing with Elminster and his best friend Farrell in Hastarl, the capital of Athalantar, where he was, the secret prince, the last of his line, and the mage lords were ruling, is I did an entire book of them being merry thieves in Hastarl, robbing jewelry through windows from sleeping noblewomen, and just generally having a fun time, except when the soldiers were chasing them, and except when rival gangs were trying to kill them. And I wrote this book, and it was great fun. And of course, Brian said, we have to lose about 300,000 words right here. So can you cut from here to here and just stitch the edges together? And so what you'll notice when you read the finished book is there's very short period of time with him as a priest.
Right.
Very short. And there's a short period of time with him being female. And there's not all that much of him being a full-on fighter. He's just behaving like a regular Joe would when he can only grab a sword and a dagger or a pitchfork and have to, deal. But there's lots of fun being a wizard, and there's lots of fun still being a thief. So that's why the combinations were in there. It was editorial direction, and from the beginning, the way the Realms books have been, TSR, now Wizards of the Coast, owns the Realms. They bought the copyright from me. They can tell me exactly what's to be in the book, and if I don't write it, they can have somebody else rewrite it to put that in there.
Right.
And so it wasn't me going, oh, I think I'd like him to be a fighter rogue. And no, it wasn't like, wish fulfillment for me. It wasn't my Mary Sue. I didn't want Elminster to be the focal character ever. I thought he worked better as the pain in the butt prime mover in the background. This sort of, well, here's another fine mess you've gotten yourselves into, sort of thing,
Right.
That guy. My early Realm stories were concentrating on Mert. Now, the problem with Mert is he is dishonest, a swindler and a scoundrel. He swears all the time. He farts and belches. He's a lecher. All the things that, well, yeah, all the things that are fun to write about. But at that time, we had a code of conduct for all TSR stuff because they were already facing this charge of Satanism and should be stamped out from what they used to call angry mothers from heck, from all over the United States, their prime market, and of course everywhere else in the English-speaking world where it got sold. And because people were yelling and screaming that this game was witchcraft, because if you're a holy roller, anything that even mentions magic is by definition witchcraft, even if there aren't witches in it.
Right.
And at the same time they were thinking this is all Satanism. And okay, most of the people using that charge, they didn't even have a coherent idea themselves what Satanism was. And they certainly couldn't have explained it what your kids sitting around a table eating potato chips and drinking soda and telling a story, how that could be satanic. But they didn't care. So to avoid or minimize those charges, because of course what it means is various store chains, particularly in the southern United States, don't want to carry your stuff because, hey, dangerous satanic stuff, we can't have that, we can't be selling that. So they wanted evil never to profit, which is why some of the improbable plots in some of the novels turned out the way they did. Now, you see, later on, we were able to go much further, and some of us, like Bob Salvatore, were able to go much further right at the beginning. Homeland ends with a demon having. Well, let's not spoil it for the people who haven't read that great book. But I mean, suffice to say, something that I was not allowed to write about. And they were trying to keep us under wraps and being good guys. So Mert didn't fit as a character, and I also thought Elminster didn't fit. I always think what works better, and I tried it in Spellfire, and I tried it again in the Knights of Drannor, was to have you look over the shoulder of some young kid who's always wanted to run away and seek adventure, and then they do as you read the story, and be careful what you wish for.
Right, exactly. No, exactly. Now, that's also the reason for the Time of Troubles, wasn't it? Because of the uproar about demonism and Satan worship and people doing role-playing games. And isn't that when they got rid of the word demon and they got rid of the assassin and all those characters?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly when demon and devil went away and they became replaced by Tanaree, and so on, which was purely to chop the argument out from underneath a simple-minded and dishonest holy roller who waves a D&D rule book like the Monster Manual or the Player's Handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guides and says, the word devil is in this book 36 times, and the word demon, and it's like, okay, if you take the words out of the book, then it's sort of like catching Senator Eugene McCarthy at his own game when he says, "I have proof," and he waves a huge sheaf of papers, "that you're a communist." You say, "Where? Show me what's on." In the same way you can say, "Really? Open that book. Show me the word deal. Show me the word devil."
Because I wrote it on a piece of paper makes it true.
Yeah, exactly. And they had just removed it. But yeah, they were getting in Time of Troubles. They were changing additions in the game. And one of the things they changed in the addition to assuage or take away ammunition from the opponents of the game was to take away Ball, whose portfolio was murder. He was Lord of Murder, and take away all assassins, at least by name. Because
and
of course,
Mask. I mean, didn't Mask disappear as well?
Yes, yeah. You can't be glorifying evil. Again, code of conduct. Right. So all sorts of things went away, and what that meant was these huge, major, artificial overnight changes in the setting, and then you had to have an explanation for it. Well, a lot of the designers at TSR had grown up with Marvel Comics and others who would have Ragnarok in Thor every 50 issues, and it was a big reset. You could change things. You could change which and so they did that. They did a Time of Troubles in the same way that they figured for a comic book company, these become bestsellers. They become products you cannot miss because they change the setting. You have to know about them. And in those days, this is pre-internet. You can't find out about them except by looking over a copy that a friend bought or going to the hobby store. And of course, that's why things were shrink-wrapped in the hobby store. So you couldn't sit there reading them without buying them in most hobby stores, unless the hobby store owner was really kind, sort of thing. You had to buy it. So it was like, you have to have this. You cannot, follow the realms without having this great new product. It changes things. It makes the product important. It'll be a big seller. And so therefore, instead of just quietly changing things, which, by the way, they quietly did, 4th edition to 5th edition, because we were thinking it changed by then. But up until then, there was quite a lot of big event happens, whether it's Time of Troubles or Karsus Folly or whatever it is. There's a big realm-shaking event among all the other realm-shaking events that are saying, "Oh, you got to buy this book because it's got this important thing in it." That you would cover a change in the rules in addition to the game with a big event like the Sundering.
Exactly, but what to drive that, wasn't it book sales that drove those realm-shaking events to happen? Because they're like, how do we get more readers or more people interested?
Yes, I'm guessing because I wasn't inside the heads of the people making the decisions, but there was a time when, you see, the gaming audience, hard for people today to believe it, because of what's going on with gaming right now. But earlier, there was a time when the gaming audience was always much, much, much smaller than the reading audience. So if you could get people who read fiction but didn't play Dungeons and Dragons or any of that other dangerous satanic stuff, or didn't have anyone to play with, if they wanted to play with their parents or their relatives, it was play canasta or play poker or play euchre or cribbage, whatever their another generation was interested in playing. It was not role-playing games. So there was this much wider audience who just read books, and fantasy books are great escapism because if you don't like your own life or you're relatively powerless, you can escape into this wonderful world where things can happen, where you can take authority figures or people who bully you in real life, and you can Shazam, bam, with magic, and it's a wonderful thing to dream about, and therefore there was always this feeling that if we could break into, and it was tried later on, Wizards had the children's books, the person's guide to goblins and dragons and so on. And there was the Mirror Stone line of books. They were trying to broaden the appeal beyond a particular age of gamers and beyond just gamers. And of course, they achieved it. We had Drizzt books with beautiful Michael Whalen covers hitting the New York Times bestseller list regularly because it worked. Right. For the people who wanted a two-fisted or two-scimitard action hero, and there's always been a desire. Look at James Patterson. There's always a desire for that from it, whether it's James Bond or The Execution or whatever, and Drizzt brought something new to the mix for the general non-fantasy, the wider than fantasy. Here was an outcast, and here was an outcast who thought about what he did. The angst in Drizzt's prologues. Here's a thinking man's hero, a tortured hero, perhaps an anti-hero, but I mean, he's got reasons for what he does. He has his own code. Yes, Conan also had his own code, and that's one of the things that made Conan attractive. He wasn't just me, hit you, it was I am the noble savage. You are the decadent. No, you cheated. You lied to me, sort of thing. And there's this there's adhering to a personal code, and it might have been a misogynistic or males dominate females code, particularly the art. But there's always been a hunger for that sort of escapism fiction. If you don't happen to be the strongest guy in the room, and you would love to just fantasize for a few seconds about what it might be to be strong enough to do that, then your typical Conan story gives you a chance to be strong enough to do that. And you get to examine all sorts of things. There's a wonderful line in the Dark Horse Conan the Barbarian comics. They're issue 0 where they're setting it up, and there's a young prince who's been sent away by his father from court, and they come across a toppled statue of Conan in a cavern full of treasure, and his father has sent him away to find riches. So I mean, this is right, and the men are just like, wow, look at all these gold coins and gems, and he's intrigued with the inscription on the statue, and he starts brushing all the dust and dirt away from what's on the huge block of stone. And one of the soldiers who's watching says, "Oh, with his bare hands,"
Right?
Yeah, because the prince is doing something for himself, and you're thinking, what a lovely wry observation about class and so on. And so all that stuff can be worked into a fantasy story, and it can resonate with people who don't play role-playing games. So there was always this attempt to have the fiction line. Now, this is at the current thinking with Wizards of the Coast as the copyright holder. They've done away with the novel lines. But there is already a few more Drizzt novels being done by an outside license, HarperCollins. And what that means is you don't have to have editors on staff and the overhead. The licensee is bearing all those costs, and you get a share of the profits. This is one way of monetizing an intellectual property like the Realms. All the many news items and rumors and ongoing attempts to make movies would be the same thing. But back in the day, there was a time when the novel lines made way more money than the games.
Oh no, I can remember going to the Barnes and Noble or the bookstores and just drooling over the dozens and dozens of novels. They had the whole section of Forgotten Realms, and it was hard to choose which book to buy if you didn't buy them all. So yeah, no, I remember those times, and I do wish for those times again, which I don't think they'll come back. But
me too.
Nice. You too. I know that'd be pleasant, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So I got here, Robert McDermott asked some questions here. He's got a couple, and we'll try to sift through them here. He still wants to know what happened to the city of Myth-Drannor.
What happened to the city of Myth-Drannor?
Yeah.
Well, okay, it depends on when and where he's talking about. If he's talking current Realms date, so we're within spitting distance of 1500 DR.
Right.
Okay. Now, this is going to be a spoiler for people who did not read The Herald, my novel that wound up the Sundering.
Shame on you if you haven't.
Yeah, so spoiler warning. At the end of that novel, a bit of magic is worked with that brings down the City of Shade on top of the City of Myth-Drannor in a huge crash to kill people. Now, there's something that I don't want to go into detail on this, but the if you've seen any illustrations of the City of Shade, it's a fairly small, compact city. It's a floating hunk of rock, honeycombed throughout, and then with buildings built on top of it. So it is not geographically large in terms of footprint or floor area that it would occupy on a map of the realms.
Right.
Drannor, although the city of Drannor has always been a sort of forest city. It's got glades, it's got avenues, it's got gardens. That all takes space. And even though it wasn't all rebuilt before the events of the Herald, and so that the elves were during the Herald fighting to defend it and having to give ground and give ground and give ground and hold on to an ever smaller the crucial things, the bit of that was above the tombs of their ancestors, where the Baelnorn guarded their family tombs. They were hanging on to that last little vestige. It follows that when the city of Shade, Thultanthar, crashes on top of Drannor, it destroys the central business district of Drannor, not the rest of it,
Right.
because there's bits of Drannor beyond that, and so it's still there. Now, what you've got in the middle is a ruin, which is very much what you had back in the 1350s when the Knights of Drannor became the Knights of Drannor. They were defending the demon and devil-haunted ruins against treasure seekers. So we're sort of back to that state of affairs, but there's still elves living all around there, and there's still bits and pieces of the city that are intact, and the armies are gone that were besieging it, and the city of Shade, although there were some survivors, they were a handful of survivors. The city as a city, and the princes as a large, arrogant, we can defeat anything you send at us magically force, are gone. They're shattered. Many of them died in that. Many of them had, died earlier in the novel. So Drannor is still around, largely as a ruin, meaning it has more and better adventure possibilities in your own D&D campaign. The rebuilding of the elves are attempting could go well, could go quickly, could be stymied. Your player characters could have a hand as adventurers in helping or fighting or trying to scour out the ruins or finding all sorts of monsters appearing there, because one of the things about the Baelnorn and the crypts they're guarding is there are some portals or gates from the earlier editions of the realms, and who knows which of these have been ripped open and are letting all sorts of critters through from it, who knows where. So that's where Drannor is now. It is a forest city, half ruined, half still functioning, but as scattered little enclaves throughout the forest, rather than an organized city with a mayor and regular police and no parking, none of that stuff. but Drannor is still there as an idea that elves dream of again, and as scattered settlements.
And so people seek out Drannor. Is it because of the rumored treasures from the original Drannor, or do a lot of people know about the portals, or is just
no?
Are they seeking it out because of the elves?
Well, the elves want it because of the dream. Though a lot of people know of Drannor as the city full of magic, so they're after magic treasure. And some of them have heard tales in taverns, exaggerated as all such tales are, that, it's a city of riches. And although it's, when they think about it being rebuilt and besieged and ruined again and rebuilt,
you're right.
Like, how much treasure is left? But then, of course, you can spin the tale the other way in the tavern. Yes, that means all the tombs have been uncovered. So all the stuff that survived all that, you can now find it.
Right, I remember the box set, The Ruins of Drannor.
Yeah.
That was a wonderful. I put campaigns through that with the undead beholders and all the treasure items that were available at the top. But those, I'm guessing all those have been either covered up or already been taken.
Maybe. But you see, the thing is, you can spin that. If you're in the tavern, you can spin that tale. You can say, well, there's gotta still be treasure there. Otherwise, why are the elves trying to keep all the rest of us away from it?
No, very good.
They must be guarding something. So yeah, there's if you're from halfway across the realms, you're human, not elven, or any other race, and all Drannor is to you is this shining idea that you've heard about in legends. Well, if I'm poor and I'm living hand to mouth and I want to better myself and see the world and end up rich, well, here's this city of song that's supposed to be full of treasure. Why not give it a try?
And the grapevine has stretched that story going across the realm, so by the time it reaches the other end, there's statues of gold and riches. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
the same thing with the legendary El Dorado for the people in Mexico or Central America, where there's supposed to be the city of gold, the Aztec city of gold.
Yeah, yeah. And if you read the early chapters of Spellfire, set back in the 1350s, yes, but I mean that's very much what it was thought about then. The point is, back then, if you went too close, ventured too far into the ruins, then definitely the demons got you or the devils got you. But
right.
But maybe it would be possible to just sort of nibble around the edges and find something, and it would be enough to set you up for life.
Yeah, but it was patrolled by demons, wasn't it? If you got too close, they would fly out over the wall and attack you.
Yeah, if you got too close. That's the thing. You got to remember the city is spread out and overgrown throughout the forest. So there's always this feeling that if you could just find some bit of it that they didn't patrol far enough, and it still had treasure that just maybe nobody had found yet.
Right.
That if you're poor or coinless, that's enough to set you up for life. Maybe.
Right.
It's worth a try.
Well, how do the elves now? How do they react to new races or people that come in?
Well, there's again the attempt to say this is our homeland, and we rule here, and so would you kindly, wipe your feet on the mat and do this and do that, and don't do these other things. But they don't really have enough strength of numbers to patrol everywhere and do everything. They have stable communities like Semberholm that they can do that, but in Drannor itself, it's still sort of like a no man's land. If you run afoul of a patrol, but a patrol is sort of like what we imagine the American Wild West to have been in Hollywood terms. There's plenty of hills to hide in, but if the sheriff's posse on their horses comes around the corner and you're one man alone, yeah, I guess, you're going to have to do what they say or die or get captured
right.
or whatever.
No, exactly.
And that's the elf patrol, But there's a lot of places where the elf patrol could miss you because there's this confused, decaying missile that, so magic isn't totally reliable. So if you think of elves using magic to locate hidden people, like infrared, or drone thing, no, that doesn't work reliably. So and everybody quote knows that unquote. So of course there's always this feeling, well, I could sneak in unnoticed, or I'm good enough, I'll just hide in a tree or under these ferns and they won't notice me. And I can sneak in. There's always that feeling that I'm special, I can do it.
Right, and they never could. Now, the mythal, did it used to confuse people and lead them away from the cities?
In part, some of its powers were activated that way at certain times. But the whole point of what's happened in the Sundering, with the spell plague first, and then the Sundering, is everything is scrambled, and everything. It's sort of like if you want to take your Dungeon Master's Wand of Wonder tables and apply them.
Kind of like the what was it, the Wild Magic that when they came out.
Yeah. If you come across that Wild Magic book and want to use it in the realms of today, there you go. Within the area of the decaying missile, just about anything could happen, which is great because it takes your powerful party where, we can rely on these spells. No, you can't.
Well, I have to say, I have a book of 10,000 wild magic possibilities, and whenever anybody in my players want to try to use wild magic, I just get that out and say, go ahead. Let's roll and find out what really happens here.
Oops. Yeah.
Yes, I've had them. I couldn't tell. One of them grew an extra arm, and every time he swung his sword, it would just punch him in the side of the head. He didn't like that.
He needed to be disarmed.
He needed to be disarmed, exactly.
Har. Yeah, well, anyway, yeah.
Exactly.
Stop me before I make another bad dad joke. Yes.
No, we like them. I'm used to them.
Yeah, okay, well, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Matthew Mott wants to know whatever happened to the specialty priests following the time of troubles when, so many gods fell.
Okay. Long before the time of troubles, when Mistral, Mistress' predecessor, perished, So that's minus 1339 DR at the time of Karsus Folly. Specialty priests ceased to exist. They became clerics, like all other priests. That doesn't mean they vanished as people. Like, they didn't just wink out, like, oh no. I'm going to have to give spoiler warnings for Avengers Affinity War if I mention that. But I mean, they didn't just go poof and vanish. They were still there as individuals. And they didn't lose their titles and their roles within priesthood. So if you were a specialty priest, and that meant that you were an Avenger of the Holy, and you were called the Avenger of the Holy, and you had a special uniform, it doesn't mean that you lost any of that stuff overnight. It means that they lost their specialty access to magic, unique spells, unique abilities, and they ended up with the same access to magic as all other clerics.
Right.
During the much later Time of Trouble, so we're zipping ahead here to 1358 DR, all clerics lost contact with their deities, so they could not renew their spells. So when they cast something, it was gone for good. If it was above the first, second, or third level, sort of, the spells that are powered by all the magical energy in the world, as opposed to granted specifically by the deity or the deity servitors, until the Gods' War was over. And when the Gods' War was over, your priests of Baal, they have to change deities. If they don't change deities, they have no access to magic, unless a meddling deity next door decides on a whim to grant that individual person spells when they pray to Baal. But otherwise, most of them are going to have to change deities, or they're not priests anymore. They could be charlatans pretending to be priests, but they've got no magic. But specialty priests of deities that were not destroyed in the Time of Troubles weren't affected any differently than regular clerics. When prayers worked again to get spells granted by the deity, they continued on as before, and they still do, subject to the changing whims of individual deities who support or curb their mortal archpriests in altering, stamping out, or starting new specialty priests, and holy orders of paladins too, of each faith. So I mean, a particular god could say, these guys are getting out of hand. These Knights Templar are not doing what I wanted them to do. So guess what? No more Knights Templar.
Right.
And then that could either, smite them all with holy fire, so each Knight Templar explodes in a ball of flame, much to the consternation of the people standing next to them, or it could just simply be telling whoever your pope is in that faith, by the way, do no longer recognize the Knights Templar, stamp them out, or burn them at the stake, or take away all their stuff, or just tell them they're regular knights now, and if they don't like it, kill them.
Which is pretty much what happened.
Yeah. I mean, but the point is, specialty priests are still sort of around now. So they're not gone. What happened after the Time of Troubles was, they got their spells back and they became specialty priests again, except for the deities that were greatly affected by the Time of Troubles, and that affected their entire priesthoods. Anyway, there you go.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. And this actually brings up a question for me. And I'm sorry, I don't remember who wrote it or what story, if it was in a book, novel, short story. I'm not really sure where I read it. But there's a scene where Ao, the head of the Pantheon, goes off to some place in his mind or wherever he lives, and he basically is showing reverence to another person, basically talking to his higher up.
His boss, yeah.
His boss, exactly.
Yep.
It'd be like the Pope talking to God. So
yep.
There's been a lot of people trying to figure out who he was talking to. And a lot of people are saying, oh, he's talking to the DM because the total, or the reader, he's talking to the reader. Is that where he was talking, or was he talking to make it sound that even these high, powerful gods and destroyers of worlds have somebody to answer to?
I think the latter, but this is my guess, because that was done in-house. That was not me. And whenever I asked for an explanation, I was told, we're leaving it up to the player, because that means the people who are Christian, can or whatever, can be happy to think that their deity, the one they believe in, is supreme. So this is not a profane game. This is not, but they deliberately left it open and unanswered. So therefore, I don't have an answer for you. And
Okay, well, so that was kind of like, remember I think the original black and white movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still.
yes,
When they first did that, and they talked about him, the alien, being able to heal or bring people back to life, they had to change the scene to where it said there's only one person who could do that, and that's the Almighty, because they said it was too big of an idea to go away from Christianity or religion to say that there's something out there other than a supreme being.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. And I honestly don't have an answer for you because that has been decreed NDA by the copyright holder, TSR. Wizards has also avoided answering that or saying, well, it's whatever you want it to be, which is
Is it
obviously.
because there is no answer to it, probably?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, is it a mistake in style to have put it in the novel? I think it's in the last of the Avatar novels, but
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it is the third book.
Yeah.
And so that'd be a Troy. I think it's a Troy Denning book, right? Or is that?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
But the point is, and I think Jim Lauder would have been the editor on
Yeah, he
on the
was the editor.
spot
Yes.
for the books, but that sort of stuff was done in house, and it's like, okay, what did you mean here? Well, that's up to you. Oh, okay, so that's where it stands. It's up to you. Or we're not answering that. We're leaving that up to individual dungeon masters, individual readers, so that they can put the interpretation they want on it. And I'm okay with that.
Right.
I wouldn't be okay with it if you then said, and therefore the realms works like this. Because then I'd say, okay, well, if you're going to pull that one, I need to know the answer to this.
Right. No, because I remember when I read it, it was like it broke my mind for a little bit because I thought it was. I think I enjoyed that it was put in there because it made you think that these people are so powerful that but even Ao, the one who controls the pantheon and basically casts all these deities down to mortals, even he has somebody to answer to.
And notice how they ended the Men in Black movies in the same way. And it's sort of, it leaves you going, wow, mind blown. And then, oh, look at the possibilities. And at the same time, it reassures you, oh my gosh, I thought the whole world hung in the balance, but look, it's just one galaxy among many.
Exactly.
Oh,
it's
okay.
like a 60s acid trip all over.
Yeah. I wouldn't know.
I'm there with you. I am there with you. So, actually, Ed, I think we're going to have to wrap things up.
Okay.
And I've really enjoyed it. I do have one thing I want to do, and you can say no. I kind of mentioned this in our when we were talking to each other earlier, but I think we can do it in that there's. I want to pick a spot randomly in Toro.
Yeah.
And just to have you give a tidbit of something that isn't an imprint and doesn't go against anything that's canon, but something that nobody knows, that nobody's ever heard before.
Sure. Where would you like to? Yeah.
Oh, well, actually, the place I actually found, I think in Piltor would be a good place to start.
Oh, well, you see, if you say in Piltur, then I say George Crashos is your man. He's detailed that realm and its history and its timelines, partially in print, because they've snuck their way into things like the Power of Faerun book in third edition. There's been stuff in there. There's stuff on the DM's Guild that George himself has written, and he's still working on stuff. So when it comes to Impiltur, I stand back and say, there's the expert. In the same way that when it comes to Cormyr, there's bits and pieces that I'm the expert on, and there's bits and pieces I turn around and say, Brian Cortio is your man.
Right. Well, exactly. No, Brian, he does the whole wonderful history of the king and everybody that is there. No, I mean, it doesn't have to be Impultor. I mean, we could do Thay.
Okay. Okay. Again, George is there first. Again, there's a thing that you should read that he just put on Dungeon Masters Guild, which explains why Thay is a land of wizards and so on and so forth. So it gets back to the root reason why Thay is this magical powerhouse and the history of Zastam. And of course, a lot of the current stuff about Thay has to be NDA because of Wizards wants it to be, because they also have plans, no doubt involving Zastam and maybe involving movies. How should I know? but it's sort of like, so I'm actually more comfortable doing that with little dots on the map that have never been more than just names, but are in the way, like they're on a trade route. So you're going to go through them. Somebody did it with Torch recently,
right? I remember
on Twitter.
The nice, wonderful piece on that on the website. No, that was beautiful.
I mean, that's easier because I'm not. You see, there are times when somebody asks me something about the realms, and I say, "Oh, NDAs," and sometimes I can tell them, and sometimes, in the past, in particular, by telling them there's an NDA, it tells them too much. Oh,
right.
So there's going to be.
We found something here.
Yeah, for instance, Nathan Stewart and Kate Welch on their podcast recently teased that there was going to be something nautical in the first official Wizards of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons source book to be released this year, the first 2019 book. Now, they did a tease and they put up, I think, 4 mock covers. Long walk, short plank, and stuff like that.
Right.
But that's fine. That's their prerogative. They're the copyright holder, and they're teasing. But if I then come out and somebody then says, "Oh, so, what can you tell me about all the details of the Sahagward all over the realms?" And I say, "Oh, there's an NDA," then they immediately know too much about what's in that book. Now, I'm making that example up. Nobody has asked me that, and there aren't NDAs, and I haven't said anything like that. So before before the Twitterverse or any other group of gamers explodes and Greenwood says there's going to be a song, well, no, it doesn't mean that at all, because I don't know.
Examples, people. It's only examples.
It's only a hypothetical example, but I mean that would be the sort of thing. I would not want to give away stuff because and we all want to know more, but by knowing too much at the wrong time, it ruins your fun. There are obvious things, like all the moviegoers lined up to see the movie Titanic, and this guy says, "Hey, guess what? It sinks. Now you can all save your money and you don't have to line up. Go home." And you could say, "Bastard." But I mean, on the other hand, that was a obvious thing, because we should all know the story of Titanic beforehand, if we know what Titanic means at all. But on the other hand, if somebody spoils the new Star Wars movie for you, or the new whatever movie, if like they've just teased the new Ghostbusters movie, if I then publish the shooting script of Ghostbusters 3, I ruin it for everybody.
Right, no, absolutely.
Yeah, and the same way, I want the realms to seem to people like a living, breathing place. Yeah, we're not nuts. We all know it's really imaginary. It's an imaginary shared world, but we want to think of it as a real place. And if I step outside as the metagaming thing and ruin the thing by revealing something, Ed says it's going to be this, then like I said earlier about the stepping out of the experience of the game to do the quarterbacking thing, I am sort of harming your enjoyment of what you would otherwise have gone to the theater or sat down at the gaming table and gone, what's going to happen? We already know what's going to happen. So I don't want to do it. And I'm happy to take things that there's almost no lore about and say, sure, here's what I had for here.
Well, how about the Lantern Islands south of the Lantern?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Someplace in that area, because I don't think anything's been written in there.
Oh, yeah, well, I did a whole website series on them.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah, it's still archived. It's 3.5, third edition era, and they're still, I think you can still get to them in the archive on the website. The direct links don't work, but there are many people who have found links that still work, and they post them from time to time, and then you can get into the archive and look down the archive, and there's I think an 8-column series on Lantan. Now that's Lantan before the Spellplague, and Nimbrel the same way. So I have covered them in the past. In the new 5th edition realms, there's been scant coverage of them, and one of the reasons for that was the adventure, Tomb of Annihilation, and what was going on in that vicinity. And I did answer some people as to what some of the offshore outlying islands were early on in my Twitter career.
Right.
When I first got on, somebody asked, so I answered. because they were safely not ruining anything that was going on. As far as I know, Lantan survived, and there are things happening afoot there, but the policy of the priests of Gond regarding like this mad charge of we're going to take over the world with technology, we're going to sell it to people cheap, we're going to become the preeminent god. In other words, something akin to our real world, going from rural bucolic farmland to everything mechanized. We can sell you a new thing, and almost the cult of technology, in the same way that there are people who spend insane amounts of money for special watches when you can buy a cheapie that tells time for but they still, oh my gosh, I have to have that watch, sort of thing. That sort of policy that the priests of Gond were trying to aggressively pursue, conquering all of Faerun with temples that also sell you stuff, useful gadgets stuff, the sort of here's the kitchen gadget of this week sort of stuff. That policy was shattered in the spell plague, and you would think, oh, but surely technology would take over.
Right.
But one of the things that was shattered in the spell plague is systems of government went away. The status quo of who was on top in power in so many places went away. Entire kingdoms were phasing out of Toril and into Abir and vice versa. So it was all chaos, and people were just trying to... They were like preppers whose moment has come, and they're trying to survive. So gadgets are really useful if you come upon them, but you really need the next meal and shelter. And what you don't need is some guy showing up saying, hi, I'm a priest of so-and-so, and I'd like to sell you this gadget. And it's sort of like, oh, hit him over the head and take whatever it is. Because we're busy here trying to stay alive. So I have already had in my mind that the thrust, the aim of the organized priesthood got shattered in the spell plague, just like so many other things. But
right.
Well, what's there in its place? That's still a half NDA and more up to each individual dungeon master, because it has to be up to every person running a campaign what tech level they want and what overall tech level. How good is the transportation and communications in your game? Nowadays in the real world with the internet, an idea can shoot all over the planet in a hurry. But we also have the sort of colonial times when a new ship brings the news that is by then a year and a half old from some far-flung colony, and it's your only contact with the colony.
Right. No, exactly. No, for me, my realm has always been pre-technology, where anything that did hint at it was so unreliable that nobody would use it.
Yeah, and that's where I think the sweet spot for adventuring is, and where I wanted to keep the Home Realms campaign. So that's why I was putting into print a way of putting the brakes on technology. So you don't have to put the brakes on them if you're a dungeon master and don't want the brakes put on them, but it's there to use if you want it. Like right. I've given you the brakes, and it's up to you to put your foot on them.
No, exactly. Well, I'm sad that I have to wrap this up. I do hope we can do this again.
Yeah, by all means, let's do it again. I'm sure there's lots of questions we didn't get to. So.
Oh, there are. I tried to just pick some out. You kind of crossed them I kind of crossed them off my list as you were talking, because some of them you already hit. But no, I have many here that we did not get to. But I do appreciate your time, Ed. Really, as always, it's wonderful to talk with you. And I know the fans do enjoy to get to hear your explanations and your ideas about the realms, and they love to hear from you.
It's pleasure. I always love talking about the realms. It is great fun, and I'm happy to do it anytime that I can squeeze in real life. So by all means, whenever we can grab a chance again, let's do this again.
Absolutely. We're going to try to make this a regular thing so that the fans can keep up to date. So
cool. Let's do it.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much for your time, and we will talk again soon.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ed.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.